Hello YouTube, this is Voidraven 5829, and today I wanted to start a series on how I go about building lists. It's going to be a multi-part series. I don't know when I'm going to find time to film the other ones, because school and two jobs and everything. Um, but today, part one is going to be list types and list themes. Um, and I'm wanting to make this playlist because a lot of people are set in their ways on how to build lists, and I'm one of them. And I've noticed that when you start getting into the habit of just doing what you're doing and not changing how you're going about building lists, you end up staying the same way and losing for the same exact reasons because you're not thinking outside the box. So this is how I build lists and how I think outside of my box. All right. Um, so when I sit down to build a list, excuse me, um, the way the way I add units is by making a few binary choices. Do I want close combat? Do I want shooty? Do I want horde? Do I want elite? That kind of thing. And excuse me. Um, so wow, I lost my place there. So I make decisions based on what kind of roles I'm looking for in that particular unit or that uh, combined arms detachment slot. All right. So the three types of list I go with that I define are fun, optimized, and competitive. A fun list is a gimmick like throwing 300 grots down in your opponent's face, or you show up for game night and you hadn't made a list yet, and some guy asks you to play, and you just throw something together. A fun list is something that you've just come up with. You haven't really refined it at all. You haven't double checked it to see if you're wasting points anywhere. It's just for fun, and a lot of it can just be flavoring. Like for 300 grots. Oh well, my opponent just happened to show up to my orc camp in the grot farm. That kind of thing. Um, a step up from fun is the optimized, and this is kind of the middle ground where I like to play a lot. Um, this is a list that has been tinkered with a couple of times to reduce wasted points to gain as much advantage as possible, while still being relatively fun to play against and with. This isn't where you're going to see an optimized Riptide Wing. You're going to see like one, maybe two Riptides kind of thing, and um, with Orcs, you're not going to see Bully Boys spammed. You're just going to see a couple of regular Mega Armor Nod squads. Um, but yeah, optimized is where I like to play, just because um, on the casual side, you're gonna have a little bit of an edge against the people playing fun lists. So you'll make it a little more interesting for them. And on the competitive side, you're gonna be the underdog, and you're gonna be challenging yourself to work up to that level. Um, and some people may like that, some people might not. It's just however you want to go. And then the third type is competitive, which, as everybody knows, is extremely optimized, cutting all corners, all loose ends, and all wasted points in favor of more competitive options, like a double Eldar CAD with two Wraith Knights, and a bunch of scat bikes, Riptide Wing with all the trimmings, drone net list. Excuse me. And competitive lists are just made of are usually based off of posted lists from ITC's tournaments and other big name tournaments. And they're just comprised of things that have already been established as doing well, like Wraith Knights and Riptide Wings Grav Spam and Gladius and Decurion and a bunch of other things. So now that there's that, you have the idea of type, fun, competitive, or optimized. Um, I'm gonna go into theme, and the theme isn't really like, um, like what kind of codex I play with or what kind of allies I play with. No, I judge my army's theme based on how fast everything is. And to judge on that, I think I call mobile units or fast units anything that can move more than 6 inches in the movement phase. So that's transports, bikes, beasts, cavalry, jump packs. I would consider jetpacks because they have the assault move. So yeah, that's what I define as a mobile unit. A static unit is something that, like a foot, a squad of guardsmen walking on foot with no chimera, or anybody without a transport, anybody just walking on foot, not doing much of anything. That's a static unit. Units that infiltrate, outflank, or deep strike are also mobile units, simply because they can get up the board real quickly, as you might need them to, or they can get around, at least initially, pretty fast. So I have 5 categories. Yeah, I know I have a lot of categories and lists and everything like that in order to make an army list, but this goes into my my list building, like hierarchy kind of thing, where you make one decision and it goes off to the next one and so on and so forth. So the lowest level of maneuverability is the static gun line, and that's no transports and no units that can move faster than 6 inches. And I'm not very much a gunline player, but there is a guard player in my meta that he castles up right in the center, and he just goes to town. It's pretty cool to watch, because he just mows things down. It's amazing. But personally, I don't like gunlines because I like being able to move around and have the feeling that I'm going to be able to grab objectives late game. Static gunlines are usually for one turn kills, or tabling, or as 5th edition called it, the leaf blower, where you just blow everything off the board and just win that way, and screw the objectives. You have nothing on the board. All right, step up from static is the mostly static, and this is very similar to the gun line. The only difference is that it has 2 or 3 units that are mobile, and so going off the guard example, this would be, you have a gun line, but instead of like a couple of basilisks, you trade those up for hellhounds. They can move. They can duck around corners. They can outflank, like literally on the table. They can outflank, and they're just otherwise fast. Mostly static it's a little more appealing to me than the completely static gunline. However, with the mostly static, if you're only sending out 2 to 3 units that are mobile, they're not really going to do that much, and your opponent is going to realize that you only have those two or 3 units, and they're going to priority target them and reduce your mobility completely. And that's why I don't really like static very much, or mostly static, just because it's easy pickings for your opponent if you're not going balls out, so to on firepower. So the step up from mostly static is the split, and this is generally where I hang around, if not the step up from this. But a split is, as the name would suggest, an equal amount between static and mobile units. This is where you, excuse me, wow. This is where you still have a backline or a backfield to Devastators or heavy weapons teams, you still have the back line of fire support, while the other half of your army goes out and grabs objectives, um, flanks, infiltrates, deep strikes, and just gets around your opponent. Um, so I like playing this kind of thing because you still have options. You can essentially working with two separate armies. Um, you have the fast side, which is going to try to press inward and um, grab objectives, and you have the other half of your army, which is just laying down the firepower and just decimating. Uh, it doesn't really, for me, it doesn't work too well in a mostly competitive setting or in a highly optimized setting. But it's a lot of fun for like fun lists, and I think it would be a good preface for a doubles game to set your strategy up against. All right, so the step up from a split, and my favorite is the mostly mobile. This is where most of your units are mobile units, and you only have 2 or 3 that can only move 6. And I like this one because you can. I basically built my orc list around this, where I have anything that can take a truck is in a truck, or is on a bike or a jet bike, with Defcop does. And turn 1, it's just careening down the board. Trucks can move 24 inches turn 1 by going at cruising speed and then flatting out because they're fast. So I like to get in my opponent's face turn 1 and lock them in the deployment zone. And then with my 2 to 3 units that are sitting in the back, those are usually grots, and they just sit on objectives, on backfield objectives, and sit there all game, and hopefully my opponent forgets about them. The problem with mostly mobile units, armies, is that you have no backfield. So if your opponent has a lot of deep striking coming in, at least in my case for orcs, if my opponent has a lot of deep striking coming in, he can easily pincer me and get me stuck between both halves of his army, which is not a very pleasant feeling. As well as, again, the way I play my orc list, I leave my backfield very wide, very open. So if he does decide to go after my grots, it's going to take me a turn, maybe 2, to get over to him to get him to stop beating on my grots, or to take those objectives back. So it does have its advantages of being able to grab everything really quickly initially, but I've found myself running out of steam pretty quickly, at least with orcs. I don't have very much experience with anything else. I haven't played my Dark Eldar in a couple of years, as much as I am ashamed to say. And then the final and fastest army theme that I acknowledge is the completely mobile. This is where literally everything in your army is in a transport, or some kind of reserves modifier or infiltrate. And Eldar do this well. They're kind of infamous for it. Or a Farsight Conclave's Tau list, where everything is jumping around, grabbing objectives, just overall moving faster than you, and positioning themselves behind walls so you can't even shoot them. A mobile army, again, is very, very devastating at what it does. But like the mostly mobile unit, or the mostly mobile army that I have, that I play with, the completely mobile does suffer from not having a fixed return position. Like they don't have a backfield. They just have the biggest clump they can get together in, or they can go to the center field. But they don't really have a rally point, and that could be detrimental, especially if you manage to split their army in half by placing your own army right in the way. You could split their army in half and make it so that it's really hard for them to support each other. So yeah, the level of mobility that you set your army at, or at least that I set mine at, it does influence what units I take, but it's used as a reference point to build the list around, and not something completely rigid. Like I can set out to build a mostly mobile army, but if I end up, throwing a couple more gunline type units down, I'm not gonna like completely scrap the list and be like, oh well, it's not a mostly mobile army. I'm just gonna change it. No, that's a little ridiculous. If you spend time on this, which I'll get into on the review step of building a list. But if I get to a point where I set out to build a mostly mobile unit and army, and I keep saying that. If I set out to build a mostly mobile army, but it ends up coming as mostly static, I'm not going to throw a fit. I'm just going to look at what options I have and then kind of nod and continue with it, and still figure out how to make it work with the strategies I've already set up within the units I've chosen. Alright guys, so I'm going to end this here. That was part 1 of my list building series, list types and list themes. On our next episode, I'm going to go over HQ and troop choices, and explain to you why no matter what army I'm building, I always start out with 1 HQ and 2 troops in a CAD. Alright, so until next time guys, I've been Voidraven 5829, and I'll see you next time.